Hey friends, welcome to day 18 of Advent. And if you tuned in with me yesterday, we were talking about Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and how God was with them in the fiery furnace. Today, we are going to pick up in Daniel because there's still so much to be unpacked here. So if you want to follow along with me, I'm going to be in Daniel in our Bibles. I think I'm going to pick up in chapter 5. There's so much that happens in between. But I wanted to start with talking about the writing on the wall. Have you ever heard that phrase? Somebody say, hey, the writing was on the wall that I had to leave, or maybe leaving a job or a relationship. They say, the writing was on the wall. Well, where does that come from? Where is that reference from? If you didn't know, it's actually from our Bibles. And so I'm going to talk about that today. In chapter 5, mine is actually titled The Writing on the Wall. And so where we left off yesterday, King Nebuchadnezzar had made an image of himself and said anybody who didn't bow down to it would be thrown into the fiery furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refused. They were saved by God. And after that, he declares, this is the God that everybody should worship. Don't worship me anymore. But it is amazing how forgetful everybody is, it seems, in the Bible. Whether it's Israelites or pagan kings, they just keep forgetting. And God must just be so frustrated at times when he's like, I have shown my power and display again and again and again. When will these people with stubborn hearts acknowledge and understand who I am? And so if you back up just a little bit, in chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar sets himself up again, full of pride. I mean, this is just like a chapter later. Let's see, it says, okay, he has a dream. Daniel interprets the dream, and it says 12 months later, the dream is fulfilled. This is verse 29. As the king was walking on the roof of his royal palace in Babylon, he said, is this not the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? The words were still on my lips when a voice came from heaven. This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. And basically, he slips into a type of madness after this, all of which was predicted by his dream that Daniel interpreted. And after a certain period of time, when he acknowledges who God is again, then he is restored to his kingdom and his throne. And once again, we have the king declaring, God, you're amazing. So if you come down to the bottom, he says, I praise the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. I mean, he goes on and on now. And you would think that lesson has hit home. And this is pretty much the last we hear of King Nebuchadnezzar. What comes next in the book of Daniel is all about his descendants. And it's not his direct descendant. My Bible actually believes that several generations have passed between when King Nebuchadnezzar was king and King Belshazzar in chapter 5. So, the question is, what happens between these generations where you have one king declaring how amazing this God is and that everybody needs to worship this God, and then you have somebody like Belshazzar who is absolutely just not. He is not worshiping God. He actually blasphemes God by bringing out the goblets from the temple that they had confiscated when they captured the people, and he just absolutely ruins this. So let's read what happens to King Belshazzar and what the writing on the wall means. So it says, he gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. So they're drinking from this, having revelry and a good time. And it is just blasphemous because these were the goblets that are only supposed to be used, set apart as sacred for God's people in the temple. And here this king is just drinking wine out of them. And it says, suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstands in the royal palace. This is a hand, guys, just a hand. There's no body attached to it. A hand appears and starts writing on a wall. Talk about creepy, okay? If this doesn't get their attention, God's like, what will? The king watched as the hand wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his knees knocked together and his legs gave way. I love that simple description there. This guy is freaked out. I mean, if you're sitting around with your friends and a hand appears out of nowhere and starts writing on the wall, okay? Not attached to anything, just a hand. Yeah, I'd be a little frightened too, and rightly so. So the king calls out enchanters, astrologers, diviners to be brought, and said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. So the queen comes out and says, and none of them can do it. None of them. Sounds familiar. Nebuchadnezzar had dreams as well that needed interpretation. Pharaoh had dreams that needed interpretation. Time and time again, God uses his people to make known, bring understanding what is not known. And so the queen says, hey, there's this guy Daniel. He's been in service for years now, and he can do this. Somehow it is remembered that he helped Nebuchadnezzar with his dream, and that everything that happened in that dream that Daniel said came true. You know, what baffles me about this chapter is the years of captivity that Daniel spends in Babylon. In his entire lifetime, he never strays from God or his ways or his practices. Even in the beginning of the chapter, they said, hey, we want to serve you the choice food from the king's table and the wine. And him and his friends, they refuse. They say, we can't, probably likely because there was pork in those choice foods, and that was not appropriate as part of their laws and their customs to eat that. And so they said no, at the risk of angering the king, falling out of favor. And they kind of propose a test, and they say, see who looks healthier at the end of the week, us who eat vegetables or the king's men who eat all this choice food and wine. And they saw that they looked healthier, and God, honored that. And so all this time, he has kept his practices and his customs. He continuously praises his God, even while in captivity. And it makes you wonder, what gives you that kind of faith and consistency when they are in the world, right? In this place, this pagan civilization, they are serving in the king's service, yet they never, ever compromise and start to look like the world. And every time their faith butts up against something that would call them to compromise, they say that our desire to serve God is higher than whatever this is, whatever the king has decreed, whatever laws this civilization has, whatever rules, it has. And the Bible, it calls us to live at peace with all people as much as possible, but overall, God is our ultimate authority. So maybe in your workplace, in your country, all of that, we are called to live at peace. We are not supposed to be stirring up trouble. However, when there comes a point where what you believe clashes with whatever that civilization or that workplace or whatever, if they're asking you to do something immoral that opposes your faith and your trust in God, then this is a lesson to be learned again and again, that we follow their example and we follow God, not what the world brings in front of us. So all of that to say, Daniel comes out, and it's interesting, the king tries to bribe him. In this, where this writing occurs, there's this big banquet here. This king is coming to power, and he's celebrating, and everybody's there. Daniel was not there, okay? He was not one to be bribed. And he says, Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, are you, Daniel, one of the exiles my father, the king, brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you. Okay, so even there's a little misclarification because he uses the word gods, plural. I've heard the spirit of the gods is in you. Not quite. He says, let's see, in verse 15. Oh, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and enchanters, they could not explain this. And he says, if you can read this writing and tell me what it means, and he offers the bribe. You'll be clothed in purple, made third highest in the kingdom. Daniel answers the king, you may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. There are times when we might be tempted to take the reward, right? But God says here to Daniel, like, I'm going to give you the interpretation, but don't be tempted by these worldly things. They mean nothing. And also at this point, Daniel's getting older and older in age. I think many of us know the story of Daniel in the lion's den, where he was thrown into the lions for not compromising in his faith. But what you don't understand is that's a whole nother king later. Okay. And Daniel is old at that point. He has lived a long life here in Babylon and still refuses to compromise his faith. It is an amazing lesson in consistency that we can take from Daniel. So he interprets it, and I'm going to skip forward to the interpretation. So that the words on the wall, our Bibles have actual them written down, and it is Mene, Tekel, Parson. Hopefully I'm saying that right. And Daniel says, this is what these words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. And then King Belshazzar, he still clothes Daniel, gives him what he offered him. But that very night, King of the Babylonians, Belshazzar, was slain. And Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. So the words came true. The writing appeared on the wall. Daniel came to interpret, no matter what the consequences are. Because, I mean, imagine how scary it is to tell a king, your time is done and you're on your way out, okay? Especially one that doesn't really acknowledge God and rejects God. Imagine how scary it was for Daniel to stand up to this. And I feel like Daniel has created a lifelong habit of listening to God, so that when he gets to his lion's den moment where he has to choose, am I going to bow down and pray to my God no matter what the consequences? He has already been again and again tested, and he has said, I will follow God no matter what the consequences. So we can go into the next chapter. You can read about the lion's den if you guys want to hear more about that. Maybe we could touch on that tomorrow. But I just love this whole section and just the acknowledgement of the years that Daniel puts in Babylon, and that he's almost age 80 by the time he's thrown in the lion's den. Can you imagine being 80 years old and basically facing death? And I mean, wouldn't you be tired of it by then? Wouldn't you be like, come on, people, don't you know I'm still going to serve my God? And yet he does. So what a great example. And we can pray that we can have a faith with just such consistent reactions as Daniel. I'm Morgan with Life and Lilacs. Thank you guys for watching.